we are engaged with someone before we have sex.
Yeah.
You bite your lip when you say that. You look
I'm
nervous.
saying that because there are trade-offs and I acknowledge them. And also it's more difficult to do that in a culture where that's weird.
Yeah.
Because what you end up doing is cutting out anyone who for whom that's too weird, right? Like you basically cut out a big chunk of your possible matches by insisting on that. Unless, say, you're very religious, in which case everyone in your religious community is going to have the same expectation. But for most people, that's going to be quite a weird thing to demand, which is why I said 3 months in the book, because it seemed like more reasonable and more achievable. And also because my mum said to me when she read the draft, she was like, if you say wait till engagement or marriage, that's the first thing every reviewer is going to notice about the book. It's going to be a big deal. So it will be, you'll get more of a hearing, if you're more reasonable. The thing is, we're a really weird culture in this regard. Like basically every other culture, there is obviously variation, my first degree was in anthropology. And one of the things about anthropology, which is so powerful and interesting when you're interested in contemporary social issues, is that there are a lot of differences between cultures. Of course there are, and that's what's interesting for anthropologists. But there are also a lot of similarities. And actually there have been various efforts over the years to compose lists of human universals, which you find in absolutely every culture. It's called the anthropologist's veto. If you find a culture that doesn't have this, then you can kind of strike it off the universals list. But the universals list is pretty long, and it includes things like every culture has religion in some fashion. Every culture has gender roles in some fashion. Every culture has wages war in some fashion. There are things that everyone does. And everyone has marriage customs of some kind. They can look different from ours. I mean, the most common way in which cultures differ from our culture, or at least our culture up until recently, is permitting polygamous marriage. So about 80% of cultures permit polygamous marriage. Only permitting monogamous marriage is more unusual. I think we're drifting back towards permitting polygamous marriage through polyamory, but we can get onto that. The thing is, I just think the thinking that went for sort of radicals of the 1960s, what happened in the 1960s, it was the pill and other tech as well. It was also an ideological thing. It was also people wanting to completely reject the old order, reject religion, reject conservatism, whatever. And what a lot of people said at the time was, why are we needlessly restricting people? Why are we, limiting people's freedom in a way that makes them miserable? We just got to throw this out the window, right? And I think that that doesn't work, like throwing conventions out the window. That's not how humans work. We have a tendency to construct in one way or another rules around these things. And human reproduction is like the most important. It's a very, very complex and delicate thing, right? That you have to get right. It's like this enormous coordination problem. You've got to find the right person. You've got to find them at the right time. You've got to ensure commitment from them. And of course, there's this whole game about how men might want to have sex with more people. A woman wants to tie a man down. It's a really complicated game. And what society's come up with is ways of regulating it. Ways of regulating heterosexuality, basically, right? Which means restricting women's freedom. It does. That's what feminists have always noted. It also means restricting men's freedom. It says there are certain things that men can't do. And we had such a system, we had you can't have sex outside of marriage has to be monogamous, all these rules that you have to ask the bride's father's permission, all this stuff. We had it all, right? And we basically threw it out the window. I mean, it lingers a bit, but we have very low. I mean, in London, right, now half of children will reach the age of 15 without their biological father in the home. There's very, very high figures compared with, say, 100 years ago. Very, very high figures. So we've seen basically the dissolution of that old order. And there are upsides to that, but there are big downsides too. And I think every culture has marriage customs of some kind, apart from ours, sort of. What makes us think that we alone among peoples can just have a free-for-all, can just, style it out, people do whatever they feel like. Do you know what I mean? I think that what anthropology tells us is that actually we need structure, we need conventions and constraints and templates. you know? And those will sometimes feel restrictive, and there will sometimes be people for whom they don't work very well. But I think the idea we can just do without them is not true.